Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight. I hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing very well, thank you very much. And it's a very exciting story that we've got here because we now know that Madison has been warned by a young boy called Huck, who tells him that his own father knows things about the Gremlins Woods that are very, very dangerous. And she's moved into a pool house that overlooks the Gremlins Woods. And he's warned her to be very careful about it. So let's find out where the story takes us, and let's continue with part 3 of our story. Huck warned me to be very careful about the Gremlins Woods, especially as I'm living in the pool house and overlook the place. He says he's heard bad stories about those woods. His father, with 2 of his men that work together as a team in his landscaping business, tried to cut down some trees for Mr. Crouch's father. But the men all bolted away from the woods. Huck believes something really bad happened to his father in there. Something so terrible that he refuses to talk about it. He told me to ask you about the place. He claims you've been witness to hearing some ear-piercing screams that sound as if a woman is being murdered in the woods. Huck said that I should pay his father a visit, but I've been rather reluctant to do so. For some reason, I don't want to hear what he has to say about the place. I'm not a believer in all that woo-woo stuff, and I don't want to start getting all paranoid now about something that probably isn't even true.
Goodness gracious me, said Francis. That does sound ominous. Well, I don't know what to say. I'm lost for words. Remind me never to talk to Huck's father about the Gremlins Woods. In my book, much like you, Madison dear, I think ignorance is bliss. There are some things I would really rather not know about. Me, I personally like to live a peaceful life. That's why I haven't got a clue what's going on in the world. I never ever listen to the news. I'm not surprised that Huck doesn't like the Gremlins Woods. I've never been kindly disposed towards them myself. They have a haunted, rather beleaguered look about them. And yes, it is true. Over the years, me and Monty have heard some harrowing sounds coming from those woods. It does sound ominously like a woman screaming, as if she's being murdered. That's a very good way to describe it, I would say. Let's just say it was enough to make my blood run cold. But I won't go near the place, that's for sure. It does look rather spooky, I admitted. But then again, they are incredibly overgrown. Maybe if some of the vegetation was cleared away, and the wood grove was thinned down a bit, it wouldn't look so unappealing. It's very interesting you should say that, Madison dear. Let's just say when we rented out the Red Vine Manor from your former landlord in Portland, Mr. Crouch, well, I hated those woods with a burning passion, for some unexplainable reason, but they scared me half to death, and I'm not exactly sure why, as I don't intimidate very easily. My horses were petrified of those woods, refused to go anywhere near the place, which I think speaks volumes. The weirdest conundrum of all is that I've never quite worked out why, when we didn't hire anyone to thin down those woods, for some reason they've been pretty well maintained over the years, much of the vegetation cleared away. By all accounts it should look much more overgrown than it actually does. So that is one mystery I would rather not explore. I refused to go into those woods from day one. And thankfully all the riding trails I've always taken are off this property. There's a lovely trail at the end of Riverside Road. Even my 2 teenage boys never went anywhere near the Gremlins Woods. They said it made them feel very uneasy. I do remember they went exploring them one day, when they were in their late teens, but came back with faces so white they were absolutely convinced that someone had been stalking them. Whether it was in their imaginations or not, I can't be sure. But much like Huck, they felt something was out there, and whatever it was, it didn't feel good. They felt as if someone wanted them to leave at once. Suffice to say, they never went back into those woods. And as for my husband, Monty, without wishing to sound mean, he is about as unathletic as a man can get. So he would have no interest at all in rambling around in the woods. As far as Monty is concerned, there is nothing wrong with the Gremlins Woods, But then again, what would he know? He's never even been in there. He'd never indulge himself with fanciful thoughts that the place could be haunted or outer-worldly. He's not wired to think that way, you see. I even think if he saw a green goblin running around our backyard, I swear he would convince himself he'd imagined it all. I laughed as I thought about Francis's well-to-do husband Monty, who certainly was the antithesis of Francis in every way. If he observed a green goblin in the backyard, Francis was absolutely right. Even if he physically saw it with his own eyes, a man like Monty would never believe what he'd seen for a single second. He'd put it down to the beer he'd been drinking, or a trick of the light, something like that. Francis continued, I've never felt like I was being watched from the Gremlins woods, like my children always did. Monty, of course, told them they were being utterly ridiculous. But then again, that dreadful husband of mine has absolutely no imagination. It didn't help, of course, that when my children were young, they were very aggrieved about the story about the two sisters in the 1800s that disappeared in the Gremlins woods. It was hardly a surprise they never wanted to play around there. And it was only when they were in their late teens that they decided to venture in there. And then they had that experience of being watched and followed. So never again. But I have to say, when it comes to those two sisters in the 1800s that disappeared into thin air when they went into the Gremlins woods, well, they're never very far away from my thoughts. I do often wonder what happened to them. I mean, how do you just disappear like that? It was such a tragic story, it really, really was. So it's true then? I asked. Of course it's a true story, love. And the reason I know it is because the man that picked up the two sisters and gave them a lift was Mr. Crouch's own father himself. He knows the story very well. Mr. Crouch was a little boy when it happened. And oh, what a story. I understand Mr. Crouch Sr., who was Mr. Crouch's father, of course, was returning home to Red Vine Manor after playing a game of afternoon bridge with a very good friend of his. He observed two young women come dashing out of the Gremlins woods onto the road. He was concerned because it was getting dark. He wasn't remotely happy about seeing two young ladies walking around on their own down a sequestered country road when the light was beginning to dim. They waved him down because he was in a car at the time and asked him if he minded taking them into the town. He agreed to give them a lift. He said that both the sisters wanted to sit in the back seat of his car. He heard them giggling contentedly together, as if they were sharing an amusing joke. At one point he glanced through the visor mirror. He wanted to ask the two ladies what they intended to do in town, just to make polite conversation. Then, to his horror, he noticed that nobody was actually sitting there. The girls had vanished. He was so freaked out, he hightailed it back to Red Vine Manor House in his car. Apparently, Mr. Crouch said his father looked as white as a sheet and was physically trembling like a jelly. It took a while for his wife to calm him down. In the end, she gave him a few shots of the finest Scotch whisky money can buy. He told his wife he was absolutely certain he may have picked up the two girls that had gone missing in the 1800s. They had run out of the Gremlins woods, and he was certain he'd seen their ghosts. He did some research into the matter about the two sisters. And then he's discovered, to his astonishment, that the photographs matched with the woman he'd actually seen. It gave him quite the fright, it did. Unfortunately, Mr. Crouch's father did not pay much attention to the girls' attire, but he does believe they were wearing 1800s clothes. Goodness gracious me, that is some story. Mr. Crouch's father must have been freaked out. I know I would have been if that had happened to me. It would give me the chills, that's for sure. Well, he was freaked out. That's an understatement. And you know, he was a very practical, down-to-earth man, much like Mr. Crouch is. He didn't believe in outer-worldly things. So when this experience happened to him, it shook him to the core, I believe. So let's just say, when Huck says strange things have happened in the Gremlins woods, he's not wrong about that. This part of the world is notorious for strange goings-on and happenings, so I've been told. There have been reports of strange animals seen in these parts that are nothing like the natural wildlife we tend to get around here. One man was convinced he'd seen a white cougar that was absolutely enormous. He said it was the oddest sighting that he'd ever seen. If Huck thinks something is watching him from the woods when cleaning the pool, well, I don't know what to say about that. Huck is not a paranoid person, so for him to say that does give me pause for thought. Frances turned around to me with a look of disquiet on her face. You haven't experienced anything untoward at the pool house, have you, Madison, dear? Because if in any way you feel uncomfortable living at the pool house, you could always move into the manor with me and Monty. We'd love to have you stay here as long as you like. There are so many rooms going spare in this house. You can live here forever if you like. I won't complain about that. That's a generous offer, Frances, but don't worry about me. The pool house is absolutely amazing, Frances. I couldn't be happier there. It's in perfect condition, with sumptuous furnishings and all that. When I came here, I couldn't believe I was going to live in the lap of luxury. You have no idea how grateful I am to you and Monty. The place is absolutely perfect. There is nothing to be grateful for, Madison, dear. Me and Monty are the ones that are indebted to you. It's the other way round. Look how you've worked like a Trojan around this house, completely transforming the place. It now does look like a silk purse. Monty has never been so happy since we employed you. He's enjoyed so many good meals that you've cooked. So delicious. I could never cook like that. But when you made that apple pie and cream, Monty was like putty in your hands, was he not? If Monty had his way, you would move in with us forever and ever and make apple pie and cream for him every single day. And God knows how big the man would become. I dread to think of it. I like Monty. He's a good man. Believe it or not, I like him too, chuckled Frances. That's why I married the incorrigible man, even though he can be absolutely infuriating at times. We're completely opposite, are we not? Like chalk is to cheese. But then again, that's maybe why we get on so terribly well. The last thing I'd ever want is to be married to someone exactly like myself. Thank God Monty is so much more ordered than I am. Imagine how chaotic this place would have become if Monty was as messy and untidy as I am. I can't imagine, I teased, giving Frances a wink. 2 weeks later. It was the first sunny day in early summer. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was happily relaxing in the pool house, reading a novel on the living room settee. I glanced out of the glass sliding doors and found my attention focused on the glistening water of the kidney-shaped swimming pool. I was thinking how inviting it all looked. I found myself warming to the idea of enjoying my first swim of the season. I mean, it really was a magnificently beautiful day, and the sunshine that trespassed through the sliding doors and dappled my face was agreeably warm. Huck had made the pool look absolutely perfect. He cleaned it fastidiously every single week. Let's just say with the sun glistening on its bejeweled surface, the water looked like it was moving. Moments later I had changed into my swimming suit. I tested the water with my big toe before I bravely climbed into the pool and began to swim many laps. The water was slightly on the cool side, but nevertheless it was pleasantly invigorating. After I had finished my laps, I climbed out of the water, shivering a little from the cold, but I quickly towel-dried my body rather vigorously. I then lay back rather lackadaisically on the sun lounge on the swimming pool patio and began to bask in the sun, which I have to say was deliciously warm. I felt rather like a salamander, because I wanted to soak it all up. I knew 15 minutes in the sun was good for you, but I was aware of the dangers of too much sun exposure, so I didn't want to overdo it. I closed my eyes contentedly and woke up with a start when I heard something hitting the water with a powerful crash. What the hell was that, I thought, feeling ever so startled. I very nearly had jumped out of my skin. That was when I saw a stone lying at the bottom of the pool that was not there before. The swimming pool water was still rippled from the disturbing, powerful impact of the stone hitting the water. I was mystified and somewhat intrigued. Had someone thrown a stone into the water just to get my attention? But who on earth had done this? Were they trying to let me know they were watching me? What the hell, I thought. I studied the Gremlin's woods very curiously, my eyes running through the wall of trees that fringed the pool like a large hedgerow, making the pool area appear very private, If you believe nothing was lurking in those trees clandestinely watching you, that is. I could not help but curiously wonder who had thrown a stone through the trees into the swimming pool. They had to be a very good shot to be able to do that, without being detected. After everything that Huck and Francis had told me about the Gremlins Woods, far from putting me off from venturing into them, it had only stirred up my curiosity. I had never shared these intrepid daredevil thoughts of mine with Huck or with Francis, as I'm not sure they would have been impressed by such explorative ideas on my part. I had never believed in the paranormal, and even the story about the two sisters that had vanished in the 1800s after venturing into the Gremlins Woods, I had simply taken with a pinch of salt. I was wired to think a lot more like Francis's husband Monty in that regard. I always believed there was a practical explanation for everything. Far from being intimidated by the stone being flung into the swimming pool, I was impressed. This was possibly one of the most outlandish things that had ever happened to me to date. It demanded an explanation as far as I was concerned. I wanted to find out who or what had thrown the stone into the water. I was hungry for answers. It did, of course, cross my mind that Huck could be toying with me, but I didn't think it would be likely for him to pull a stunt like this on me, especially with his extreme aversion to the Gremlins Woods. I went back into the pool house and threw on a pair of jeans and some sneakers. I decided that I was going to take a walk in those woods and debunk all those paranormal claims once and for all, and to put to rest some of those wild rumours that had circulated about this place over the centuries. I'd be able to tell Francis and Huck that their unsettled, disquieted fears about the place were likely all in their heads and had no bearing to reality whatsoever. If I could convince them of this, Huck might even consider clearing away some of the heavy-duty vegetation growing between the trees that had got a little out of hand. Before I had time to persuade myself otherwise, with any crawling misgivings, I found myself in the woods. It was heavily overgrown, as I suspected, but some of the paths were not that bad, although occasionally branches would indiscriminately scratch at me, tugging dispassionately at my clothes and hair. The ground was richly fertile, with the soil as black as molasses. Leaves were scattered liberally over the surface of the ground, and were quickly turning into mulch. Everything was so vividly green, from the leaves on the branches of the trees to the rambling foliage growing across the forest floor. I was struck by how beautiful it all was, despite how wild the woods had obviously become. I promptly forgot about Francis and Huck's suspicious reservations over the woods, for in my humble opinion there was nothing to fear. I daringly ventured deep into the woods. The paths opened up superbly, as if they'd been well maintained, which I did find oddly bizarre. There was no way the woods should look as ordered as this. It really was a conundrum to me. That was when I heard the giggles. It was the sound of two young women giggling. I was now in abject astonishment, because here in the middle of the woods, on the Red Vine property, where no one should be around, I had heard these female giggles. The worst part of it all was that I felt the giggles were directed at me, as if whoever was in my midst was actually having a laugh at my expense. It was a feeling like when you're a child and some mean children in the classroom are whispering in the corner and making fun of you behind your back. It felt exactly like that. The giggling persisted, making me think of the two ghostly sisters that had climbed into Mr. Crouch's father's car and promptly disappeared. They had emerged from the Gremlins Woods onto a sequestered country road and accepted a lift from him. Could they be here now? Were they the ones laughing at me? Did their ghostly spectral figures haunt this woods and the sequestered country road beyond? I had never believed in such things, so why was I entertaining such preposterous, idiosyncratic thoughts? "Who's there?" I called out. "Is somebody there? Who's that?" The giggling stopped at once. Everything went airily quiet, and even the bird song stopped so sharply. The silence was deafening, almost more unnerving than the giggling had been. For a brief moment I wondered if I imagined it all, but then I heard the bothersome whispers, and let me tell you, there is nothing more discomposing than hearing whispering all about you. The whispering felt terribly personal, almost as if hundreds of invisible people were nastily whispering about me and saying all kinds of mean things. It was as if even the trees in the wood grove were conspiring against me and gossiping on my behalf behind my back, as if the Gremlins Woods itself had turned against me and was desirous to spit me out like a rancid piece of old chewing gum. It was the most disingenuous, inauspicious feeling I have ever experienced. It was so profoundly disquieting. It made my skin crawl. All of a sudden, my calm demeanour cruelly seemed to have been snatched away, rather like when a seagull steals your sandwich from you. In a trice, I was fully consumed with an ominous sense of foreboding, a feeling of impending dread, the likes of such that I've never encountered before or since. Now I was tasting what it was really like to experience true, very, very raw fear. My first thought was I needed to get the hell out of the Gremlins Woods. All I know is I became bewildered, confused and disorientated, almost as if my mind had lost its full sharpness, so that my clear thinking on my part had become as clouded and murky as the water in a pond impregnated by way too much algae. It felt as if someone other than myself had grabbed hold of my thoughts, because everything became so chaotically jumbled. How the hell was I going to get out of these woods? I couldn't even remember the path I'd taken to get in here. Why couldn't I remember it? This was absurdly crazy. Was I going stark raving mad? What on earth was wrong with me? Why was my memory so disjointed? I steadily began to panic as the rough-textured branches of the trees on my left-hand side began to shake and rattle rigorously, like a cheerleader's pom-poms, and that was when I knew that someone was watching me. I could feel a pair of iniquitous eyes burning into the back of my skull. There was nothing friendly about this creepy feeling that overcame me. I almost jumped out of my skin with trepidation when something began to shake the branches even more furiously. And for anyone to be able to do such a thing would mean they'd have to be powerfully strong. Whoever was doing this to the tree branches did not want me here under any circumstances. I could sense an indignant frustration in the air, as tangibly as if I was smelling wood smoke. In that moment, I tasted danger on my tongue, as the back of my throat was infused with a rank bitterness. It seeped down my esophagus into my stomach, so that my insides were beginning to spasm, recoil, and squirm. Something was definitely there. I knew it with every single fibre of my being, like I've never known anything before. Whatever it was hugely big, very dangerous, and it wanted me gone from this place. That much I knew with a pronounced sense of certainty. I just knew that I was in grievous danger, even if I couldn't physically see the threat. In a flustered state of panic, like a pigeon caught up in a cat's jaws, I studied the branches ever closer to see if I could observe someone standing there. The tree branches shuddered and shook, but nothing was in my line of vision. All of a sudden, in my peripheral vision, I caught sight of a shadowy impression of something enormously big, hiding among the branches. The figure was so vague and obscure I could barely see it. Whatever it was monstrously huge. "Get out of here!" a voice cried out in my head. "Get out of here!" It was the voice, most likely of my higher consciousness, trying to direct me to safety. I know they say you should never run away when there's a predator around. My grandmother had told me that often enough. "Even if you're afraid, Madison dear," she had said, "walk away from the danger very slowly. If you run, the predator will give you chase, and you don't want that." My grandmother's warning words were completely useless to me. I couldn't pay them any heed. At this specific moment, a hasty retreat was the only thought in my mind. I needed to get out of here as quickly as I possibly could. But I might as well have been running through a thick, blurry white fog, because that's how muddled my mind had become. I did the only thing I knew how to do to escape the formidable situation in which I found myself so cruelly entrenched. I began to run and run and run, my legs wobbling beneath me like an unsteady camping chair. I was sure they were going to give out on me, and I would crumble on the forest floor into a mangled heap. That was when I heard the treacherously indignant roar, and heavy thunderous feet giving me chase. My running had certainly made this predator, whatever it was, begin to pursue me. Would that have happened if I'd simply walked away calmly? I'm not so sure. I was too petrified to turn around to see what it was that was chasing me. I was far too afraid. I knew I couldn't unsee anything that I was to witness. Besides, I didn't have the luxury of time to glance over my shoulders, as that would cost me very, very important seconds that I simply could not afford to lose. My heart was galloping violently in my chest, as a frenzied wind seemed to whip up among the trees, so that the leaves began to rustle. I ran like I have never run before or since. I ran into tree branches that scratched me and tugged at my clothes. Sometimes the tugs of these branches were so powerful I almost lost my footing. Angry roots, burgeoning their way through the forest floor, threatened to trip me up at every second. But I ignored all nature's stumbling blocks, and ran through dead ends fringed by thorny briars and thick menacing vegetation that seemed hell-bent on bringing me to my knees. I scrambled awkwardly through a maze of endless trees, with branches that seemed to be like hands that wanted to grab me and throttle me. Every cell in my body was begging me to find the light, and that was when I heard the female giggles, and ran towards those giggles. And as I ran towards the giggles, the woodgrove magically opened out, and I saw the light of the day peering at me like an old friend. I could hear this monstrous thing behind me, grunting and heaving, its heavy feet hitting the ground so powerfully that the ground itself began to vibrate. Whatever was in keen pursuit of me was absolutely enormous. Of that I was in no doubt. Once I blasted through the trees, I found myself at the swimming pool. I didn't dare to even stop to draw breath. I didn't even take a fleeting second to glance at my pursuer. I just couldn't do it. Breathlessly I ran to the front door of the pool house that thankfully was not locked. I didn't dare look behind me. I heard no footsteps pounding the ground, nor any more treacherously heavy breathing, which gave me a faint hope that maybe this thing was finally gone. I opened the door, locking myself very carefully into the pool house. It was here that I would feel safe, although safe is not really a word to describe my uncertainty at this particular point in time. For a brief second I dropped to the ground, my back against the front door, and I began to try and calm down my frantic breaths. Once they became more steady, I quickly rose to my feet. I dashed over to the floor-to-ceiling sliding doors from the living room area that overlooked the swimming pool, and I stared out towards the Gremlins woods. I wanted to see if I could see who or what it was that had given me chase. That was when I observed a great big rock flying into the air and landing into the swimming pool with a mighty, thunderous, angry plop. I felt as if this was a cryptic message for me, telling me to go nowhere near the Gremlins woods again. And then stepping from behind the trees, that was when I saw him. I think he showed himself to me, for I doubt I would have seen him had he not stepped away from the trees. So he definitely wanted me to see him. He stood there so formidably, with his powerful tree-trunk-sized legs straddled. There are no words to describe the sheer size of this hideous thing. He was gargantuan in every sense of the word, and was built as solidly as a brick shithouse. Excuse the awful language, but those are the only words I can use to describe the sheer density and size of this creature. I would say this humanoid creature, which I realized to my astonishment was a disagreeable Bigfoot, was the scariest, most terrifying thing I have ever beheld. The Bigfoot was easily 11 foot tall, with burly, muscular proportions. He was covered in long flowing dark hair, and his face was astonishingly human. The Bigfoot was swinging his arms around rather furiously. He slammed his fists directly on his chest and roared at me. Then he turned around and glided into the Gremlins woods. For a long time I almost hyperventilated, and finally I calmed down. I wondered what it was that I should do. Should I tell Frances what I had seen in the Gremlins woods? But then again she told me ignorance was bliss. If I told Huck I'd been in the woodgrove, he would be very upset with me. Maybe he would think I was stirring up stuff. It would be wise not to mention this to him, I thought. But what about Huck's father, Golly? Short for Goliath, his name was. Maybe he could tell me about the Gremlins woods. Yes, I would pay Huck's father a visit. I didn't feel threatened living at the pool house, but I didn't fancy swimming again after that rock had been thrown into the water, and I couldn't help but wonder if the Bigfoot imposed a threat to me. I needed to know if this was the case. Maybe Golly could give me some answers, and hopefully some sound advice. I could, of course, accept Frances's kind offer and move into the Red Vine Manor House to live with her and Monty. And while that was an agreeable idea, I really liked my independence at the pool house. No, I decided I'd go and visit Golly in the morning. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.